Museum of American History. I'm Kathleen Franz. I'm the acting director of the Lemelson Center for the Study of Invention and Innovation, and I really want to welcome you and our speakers as well. On behalf of the center, this is our Innovative Lives program featuring Dr. Dawn Scott, who is VP of Performance and Innovation for the Washington Spirit.
Thank you.
And for those of you that are joining us for the first time, the Lemelson Center is the Smithsonian's leader in studying invention and nurturing creativity. The Lemelson Center sponsors fellowships, collects archival material, some of which you've seen, produces exhibitions, and public and educational programs like this one. So please check out our website and our social feeds for more information, and we hope to see you here again. Our annual Innovative Lives program series presents unique opportunities to meet inventors and to have live conversations that demystify who invents and why they invent. To celebrate the opening of our brand new Change Your Game exhibition, the Lemelson Center has dedicated this year's Innovative Lives series to sports and invention that takes place around and within sports. So after the conversation, if you haven't already had a chance to see Change Your Game, we hope that you will have take a minute and walk over to the Dorothy and Jerome Lemelson Hall of Invention and take a spin through the exhibition. The family-friendly show explores the dynamic role of invention and technology in sporting events. And it asks who invents for sports and why? And how can we nurture our own creative identity and learn from these inventors and become game changers? So before we get started with Dawn and Monica, I want to talk a little bit about some guidelines for tonight's discussion. So please hold your questions till the end. When we're done with the discussion, we'll open it up to all of you. There'll be people coming down the center aisle with microphones to take your questions. This program is designed for all ages, and we follow the Smithsonian's Code of Conduct that requires civil and respectful engagement from all of us throughout a live program. The program is also being recorded and will be available to watch on our website. And of course, please check to make sure your cell phones are on silent. Now I'd like to really warmly welcome our moderator, Monica Smith, who silenced her cell phone before coming up on stage. Monica is currently the Chief of Informal Learning at the Library of Congress's Center for Learning, Literacy, and Engagement. But before the Library of Congress stole Monica away from the Smithsonian, she had been here for almost 3 decades in the Lemelson Center, where she was part of the senior leadership and she developed programs. She oversaw Spark Lab, which is right around the corner, and she developed exhibitions, including playing a key role in developing Change Your Game, which is why we're delighted that she's back tonight. We're so grateful to have her here with us and to talk with Dawn Scott. So Monica and Dawn, thank you so much for joining us. And we're really looking forward to a lively conversation. So over to the two of you.
All right, thank you so much. So it's a real honor for me to be invited back. As you heard, I was here for a long time, and there's many wonderful faces in the crowd that I had the privilege to work with. And so thanks to my opportunity of working on the Change Your Game exhibition, I was very interested particularly in women in sports and invention. I interviewed the inventors of the jog bra, for example, the first sports bra for women, just before COVID, actually literally the week we closed down. So it's a joy to get to come back here and have this evening with Dawn Scott, who is the Vice President of Performance, Medical, and Innovation at the Washington Spirit, which is, as you know, DC's professional women's soccer team. Yay. I first have to ask before I say a little more about her, how many of you have been to a Spirit game? All right, that's what we like to see. Excellent. All right. Well, in case you haven't already memorized her bio, I will read just a little bit to give you some context. She's originally from Newcastle, England, and she spent more than 2 decades here training women athletes to maximize their performance at the highest level. In addition to her role at the Spirit, she provides high-performance support across Olympique, Lyon, and London City Lionesses as part of Michelle Kang's multi-club ownership, and we'll talk a little more about that. Donna's previously performance director for Inter Miami CF in the MLS, so she's also worked in men's professional soccer. She also worked as head of performance for the U.S. women's national team for 10 years, supporting the team at 3 FIFA World Women's Cup finals and at the Summer Olympics in both 2012 when they won the gold and in 2016. She's also the head of exercise science for the head of exercise science for the England women's national team for over 10 years during 2 separate stints, supporting the team at 2 European championships, 1 FIFA Women's World Cup, and the 2020 Olympic Games. And the reason we have her tonight is because she really is at the forefront of women's sports science and training. She's really taken athletic training that is appropriate to women's biomechanical, hormonal, and nutritional needs to help lower the risk of injuries and optimize performance. So I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to talk with her about some of her innovative scientific and medical approaches to training, the work she's done with various people, and also get a little background on her life and career and how she got inspired to be here today. So with that, please start thinking about questions you want to ask her. And then as was noted, we will have a little chat here for a little bit, and then I will open up Q&A, and we hope we can have a wonderful discussion with everyone. All right, sound like a plan? All right, great. So here we go. So welcome, Dawn.
Thank you.
I think, at first, I gave a little bit of your bio, but if you want to say just a little something, because you were the first to be in this position at the Washington Spirit as the Vice President of Performance, Medical, and Innovation. So tell us a little bit about what that is, what you do.
Sure. Thank you, first and foremost, for the invite to be here. Super excited, and thank you for everybody attending today and the amazing exhibition. If you haven't been, I strongly suggest you go at the end or come back another time and really visit that. So in terms of that position, I'd say it's very much down to Michelle Kang and what she's doing globally in the game. I was happily working at Inter Miami, albeit I was never somebody who was passionate to be in men's sport or men's football, men's soccer. I feel like some people do have the passion. I want to work in men's professional soccer and almost like tick that off. It just so happened at the time that job came up and I kind of was in it, but I was in the role, and at the time I then got a call from Michelle Kang and Mark Krikorian, who's our kind of general manager, sport and director on the football side, and it was Mark Krikorian, for anybody who's met him. I'd known him for years in my role with US Soccer because he was Florida State head coach. I was kind of following the news, and I'd seen a couple of months ago he left, resigned from Florida State, and then I see Michelle Kang appoint him, and I'm sat in my office in Miami. The next day, phone rings, and it's Mark Krikorian's number, and I pick it up, and he's like, Scotty, because that's what he calls me. And I was like, coincidence here. How are you doing, da-da-da? And I'm like, Mark, you've had a journey, you're at Washington Spirit. And he's like, yeah. And then it's, we want somebody in performance. Michelle Kang asked me who I should hire. I want to get the best. I want to work with you, kind of, are you interested? And I was like, totally taken aback. It's like, I'm happily in my job, and I was like, okay. Mark and I always said if we had the opportunity, we might work together. So he's like, would you be open to a conversation? I'm like, yeah, sure. I think this was a Tuesday. He's like, tell me when you could meet. And so I told him, and then by the Friday, it was, okay, myself and Michelle are flying down. We'll meet you at this restaurant this time. Make sure you turn up. So I kind of turn up, met, and I was telling Monica earlier this evening, by the end of that meeting, you just talk like, I'm passionate about women's sport. I'm passionate about women's soccer. It's what I've known, what I've grown up as. And, we have a conversation, and, Michelle touches on a little bit some of her vision, and I know Mark anyway. And, by the end, and I'm not saying this to big myself up, and I did say this earlier as well, she's like, you're wasting the men's game. You're so passionate about women's sport. We need you in women's soccer. You need to come back. I'll call David Beckham and tell him, you're not going back.
I love that.
Like, whoa. So it was a few months of exchanges like that, and, I presented a plan to her because I didn't want to come back and just be in women's soccer again. I wanted to do it right and do it how female athletes should be supported. And so I presented a plan to her where previously the department had been, 3 staff, 2 medical, 1 performance. I presented a plan of like 15 staff, and it was a performance director. It was performance staff with specialists of gym, of on the pitch, of rehab. It was nutritionist, psychologist, female health specialist, medical team built out so that you had enough medical to cater for 25, 30 players. And then it was PhD students to do some of that research and innovation. And I sent it to her a bit ballsy. I was due to meet her the next day, and I was like, do I send it, do I not? Do I send it, do I not? And I send it, and I met her the next day, and literally she kind of pen all over it. She's like, I love it, when can you start? So that was kind of then, coming back in, and it's still at the time, I think it was still a month later, and they kept asking, like, when are you going to start, when are you going to come? And I was like, I'm not sure, I'm still deciding. And I ended up picking up the phone kind of one Friday, and I still vividly remember it, and saying, like, how do I know you're genuine? Because, you meet people in life, and, all walks of your life, and, people kind of talk the talk, how many walk the talk. And she's like, I can only guarantee and give you my word and like say I'll do it. And I thought about it over the weekend, and on the Monday I called her and said I'm going to join. And I've never looked back, and she more than walks the talk. She kind of like supersedes that in terms of what she does. So committed to it, and then just never looked back. And we've now got a department of 17, so I kind of nudged the number up a little bit as well.
So talk a little bit about some of the work you're doing now with the Spirit. That is, how is it new and different than what had happened before? Because you said there were only like 3 people. Now you have 17. So what? So what do you do?
A lot of it is individualization for the player, and that's putting the full support round of FIFA and FIFPro, which is FIFPro is the player representation for female soccer globally, have done reports over the last 4 or 5 years, and the areas where players don't have support are nutrition, psychology. We have a full-time dietitian. She's actually on maternity leave and came in yesterday with a young daughter. We have a full-time psychologist, and then we have 5 in the medical department. In our performance, we have a sports scientist, so somebody who delves into the data, makes insights, looks at that. We have a strength and conditioning specialist in the gym, sports science manager. We have a director of performance and innovation. She's also our female health lead, and that brings me on to the other layer that we put in is the whole female health and female physiology is the underlying piece. And for many years in my career as a practitioner in female sport and a female practitioner in female sport, I didn't take into account like menstrual cycle or female health. And for me, looking back, part of that is at college, at university, I did sports science, and there was one lecture on female physiology, and it wasn't really applied to sport. It was just about reproductive system and hormones, and that was about it. And it was like, okay, yep, tick, we've done one lesson on female physiology. And so I'm like, okay. And at the time as well, I didn't at that time, being on that sports science course, expect to have the path and journey that I have. And so that was one. I didn't really have the education, the background. And the other piece was, you come in and you're one practitioner, because for the first 20 years of my career, you are the only practitioner, because in female sport it's typically underfunded, under-resourced, and you do everything. And it's like, how do you take into account menstrual cycle for 25 players? You can't. I couldn't comprehend how I could do that. And then 2015, the US won the World Cup, and the following year, 2016, I was actually at a conference in Doha, and it was on train load monitoring, and most of the audience was male, and it was all about male sport. And then there was a question, how would you apply that to female sport, and how do you take into account the menstrual cycle? And the person hosting was like, we've got Dawn Scott, she works with the US women's team that just won the World Cup. Let's ask her what they do. And I was embarrassed because we didn't do anything, because I was like, didn't have the education, and I was like, how do I do that as one person? And after that conference, I came away and I upskilled. I did my own educational courses. I reached out to people who were experts in terms of research, applied kind of support in the women's game. And then 2018, 2019, in the lead up, I was with the US at that time in the lead up to the World Cup. brought in experts to educate on female health, female physiology. Myself and a male member of staff working across US Soccer and the NWSL. He's now the performance director at Gotham. Every year we would travel out to all of the NWSL teams and we do fitness test and profiling. With the teams, we carry our, valve system and this system and force decks and timing gates, and we'd always also deliver an education session. And in 2019, we delivered that on menstrual cycle, female health, and purposely I delivered half of the sessions and he delivered half of the sessions. And you started the session and two things stand out. One is male staff would stand up and say, okay, I don't need to hear about this, I'm going to leave. And some of the players would say, should they be in here? And I'd be like, yes. And some of the players would go back and get the male staff, the male coaches, because it's important that everybody hears and understands and applies and normalizes the conversation. And then the other thing, and again, I remember this, is a young player who was in the league at the time, you start talking about menstrual cycle and periods, and I could see she put her hood up and she's sliding down her chair. And so again, it's about the education and normalizing the conversation. So from 2019, that's kind of what I started to do, was educate around female health, female physiology, and it's the players, it's the coaches, it's all of the support staff. And I went back to England in 2020, and that's the first thing I did. And Phil Neville, who was the head coach at the time, he was fully supportive. When I went back in, he's like, okay, tell me one thing you would bring to England from the US women's team in terms of the work you've done. And without hesitation, without doubt, I said, educate on female health, female physiology, because that is not taken into account. And some staff were opposed to it, they didn't want to do it, and some of those staff were male, and he was supportive, and he said, okay, let's do it. And he, supported me, he was an ally, and, we pushed, and, we brought that in, almost the same model we did with US Soccer in 2019. I didn't stay with England for the European Championships. The role at the time just didn't work out and just wasn't the right fit in terms of where I was, but obviously the team then was successful in the European Championships, and for me, I believe not the work I did, but the person we brought in to educate, and she continued that on around the female health and individualizing was a big part. And again, when I came back here to Washington Spirit, it's the first thing we did. And there's nothing more for me powerful or rewarding than when you've done some of that education with the players, and then you're empowering them to understand their own physiology and their own application. And a few months in, you have players saying, I noticed this today, and then I've introduced this strategy, and actually I feel that, I don't know, my menstrual cramps or the bloating is reduced. And for me, that's just as rewarding as a player scoring a goal or, winning a gold medal, because it just shows that they're starting to understand their own physiology and actually use that to their advantage. So,
well, speaking of that, you mentioned your Aura ring. So can you talk about that? You said all the players wear them.
Yeah. So again, in when we went back to England, actually when we supported the team, so I went to the Tokyo Olympics with the GB team, and we bought the players kind of Aura rings. And then when I came to Washington Spirit, that's the first thing we did, and we've done the same across Olympic Lyonnais and London City Lionesses. And a wearable, it collects heart rate variability, which is a measure of recovery, sleep, and then the most important thing for menstrual cycle tracking is temperature deviation. And basically during the second half of your menstrual cycle, so the luteal phase, temperature starts to increase, and so again players have access to their data. That's another big part we've introduced and we do, is give players access to their data, because a lot of athletes and elite athletes don't have access to their data. And so we educate on what things they can see or spot at different times of their cycle. And one is the second half of your cycle, you evidently see an increase in core temperature, and you literally see a drop, and that tends to be when you would start your next period or kind of phase one of your next cycle. So again, players see this and track it, and they identify when they're going into certain phases, and we have an individual kind of symptom management plan because of the education and the tracking and monitoring we've done, and players then recognize what phase or part of their cycle they're going into, and they start looking at their development plan, we have QR codes, so they have strategies that, you know, would help with some of those. And, you know, it's again that 360-degree support of psychology, nutrition, medical, because lower back pain is a massive symptom that a lot of players experience. So again, you know, medical and S&C are kind of involved in that. You know, tender breast is probably, like, as I'm saying it, some of you are probably sat there thinking, oh my God, I can't believe she just said that. But it's a common symptom. And even doing weight training, if you're having a player do an exercise where it's putting pressure across this area, then we just adapt some of those exercises. Even the fit of the sports bra, like the jog bra, 1970s, can you believe that's the first time that was introduced and developed? And just think
Late
about
1970s
females,
even.
you know, kind of back then of, you know, tender breast pain at different parts of the cycle, and you don't have that access.
Well, speaking of that, we need to go back then to the 70s, when you and I were, I believe, both born. Talk a little bit about the experience of, like, how, you know, what was sports like for you? Were you involved in sports as a kid? How did you get into it? And kind of what was it like to be a girl in sports in England in the 70s?
I mean, I was the youngest of three children and two other sisters. So I was the youngest. I was a tomboy, and you know, you kind of look back and, you know, why was I a tomboy? How did I become a tomboy? Was I just a tomboy? You're like, is it because Dad was disappointed he didn't get a son as a third, and maybe he's then made up for it? And so at school, like the options to play was netball and field hockey. Then when I went to what we call in England like comprehensive school, but I always would then come home and I'd be out on the street with the boys playing football, soccer. I'm going to say with football because it just is football. Yeah. And I'd literally be out on the street, like, I don't know if you've heard of the term, like jumpers for goalposts. It would literally be that. I can picture, like, my youngest days, and there was a piece of grass which seemed like the size of Wembley, which was probably like a postage stamp. Yeah. And we'd literally have two goals either end. My team was Newcastle, so I'd either be Chris Wardle or Paul Gascoigne Gaza, and literally I would, like, just be covered in mud kind of when I came in. And I guess at the time I didn't really comprehend, or I don't know, notice that the boys would go off and play for a team, and, you know, it's like some days they wouldn't be there and I'd be like, yeah, whatever, like, I'm still going to play. But I just never kind of like comprehended that actually there wasn't a team for girls. And then, and I don't know how I found out about this, there was a tournament for girls, like a five-a-side tournament, and again, I just love football. I just love playing football, and I would go to the Newcastle games, and again, ironic with Dad, like the paternal side. And there was this tournament advertised, and so I asked a few of my friends, do you want to take part? And they're like, yeah, whatever. Like, yeah, I'm not, and I'm typically going to say this, and this is probably a sexist thing to say, I'm not going shopping, I'm not, you know, kind of going out or doing anything else. Mm-hmm. And so got a team together, we won the first round. And then the second, and I was so excited, and I'd arranged it, and, you know, like, I'd organised it all and everything. And then the second round of the tournament came, and one friend was like, I can't, I'm busy, I'm doing this. And I just remember, and I'm getting a bit emotional now, I don't know why, but being in my room and, like, being in tears because I really wanted to go to this next round of the tournament, but my friends had other plans and we couldn't. And then when I was about 14, my mom called a radio station to say, I've got a girl who is, like, just football, just loves football. Is there any teams in the region that she could go and play for or train with, or, you know, anything like that? And a team replied to the radio station. It's kind of probably like back in the day as a phone call, isn't it? It's like a phone call or a letter in the post. Yes. So probably 2 months later. Yeah. This team kind of replies and said, like, yes, we're a team, but at that time my parents were just going through a divorce. I lived with Mom, we didn't have a car, and it was like 3 bus rides to get to Whitley Bay is where the team was. And, you know, it was grown women, and on a Sunday there would be games in, you know, Manchester or Birmingham, and, you know, that is like a 5-6 hour journey each way. So, you know, I did it for a few weeks, but then it just wasn't sustainable. And so as much as I was good to not do it, I just stopped playing like that, but just would keep playing in the street with the boys until I probably got to 15 and 16 and started to feel a bit awkward that I was doing that. And then I didn't really play again organised until I went to university at 18 and played for the university team then.
Was there any women in sports that you admired as a kid? Or were you so focused because most people were just seeing men's sports at the time?
I just don't remember any like women or females in sport, even in sports science discipline. You know, I think sometimes people say, who was your role model? Who did you look up to? And honestly, I'd probably say like a lot would be male, because that's who in sports science were in the field. There was not females in the field of sports science or high performance.
So what led you, going into university, what led you into your major, and what did you decide to do, and how did that, did you have any professors or others who sort of mentored you?
Well, I got third time lucky, because the first degree I started was physics. So I was at school, and my subjects at school, so A-levels, was maths, physics, electronics. I was heavily in STEM. Just loved the science side, loved numbers, you know, kind of the whole kind of science piece. So, you know, loved physics. I don't know, like admired like physics teacher. Seen him as a role model, was like, I want to be a physics teacher. So I thought I'll go to university and do physics. Passed my first year. Second year, you had to choose modules. One I chose was astronomy. And I remember just sitting in the lecture theatre, and there was a lot of very smart looking, like intelligent looking people. And I was like, you know, trying to listen to things about the galaxy and stars and thinking, this is whoa, and where's this going to go to? And so came out and called Dad and said, I don't think I can stay, want to stay. And so I pulled out, and I actually worked for a year, which back then the role was called VDU operator, which stands for Visual Display Unit, which was it literally just inputting data into a computer all day long. And, you know, but you know what, like it taught me how to use a keyboard and really quickly. So in those later years when you're typing up assignments or PhDs, like that becomes very handy. So did that for a year, and then again, sports science wasn't really a thing, because probably show my age, like this was early 1990s. So then thought, like maths, like numbers, let's do accountancy. Started an accountancy degree at Sheffield Hallam University. Also football. Some of the modules were like law and business and economics, and some of them clashed with football training. The football, we got to the final, won the final. The degree I passed, but again, I was like, yeah. And then third time was sports science, and I went to Manchester Metropolitan University, did sports science degree. At the end of the course, started thinking like, what job am I going to do? Where does this take me? Because again, this is 1996, and I didn't really know what sports science in the applied setting was. And
were there other women in your class? Or was it mostly men? Yeah,
there was other women, not many. There was, I don't know, 10% of us maybe women, and the rest kind of male. And there was a master's in sports nutrition advertised, and so me and my friend were like, it was funded, let's apply for that, let's do that. It was in Aberdeen, which is far, far north in Scotland. You don't realise how far north until you start driving. And so I did that for a year, and then after that, taught for 3.5 years in sports science at Worcester, and that really helped me like almost, I guess, get that education piece of how to teach anatomy, physiology. Me and a fellow tutor that I worked alongside, we ran a nutrition module, and probably like ethically we wouldn't get away with probably some of the things we did back then. Like we did a sodium bicarbonate study of, you know, you do a trial and placebo, and the number of pills we like would make for some of these individuals, because it's based on grams per kilogram body weight, and some of the side effects were not very pleasant. But the students understood why, you know, sodium bicarbonate might work, but for some others might not because of some of the side effects. But it, you know, you kind of tried things and learned things, and then I happened to be working with somebody who was married to a sports scientist who worked at the English FA on the men's side, and she said, like Mark, my husband, said they're going to be expanding, they want to bring in sports science support for the women's team, and this was 2001. You should think about applying, and so I applied, and Hope Powell was the manager at the time, and interviewed, and she said she was sick of me writing to her with some of the research I've been doing and asking about, you know, kind of jobs in women's football or supporting, and she's like, I'm just going to give you the job and then you'll stop writing to me. And so got the job with England in 2001.
Persistence pays off.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it sounds like then you really didn't have a lot of other women involved, but there were a few key women like her, right, who got you in and sort of supported you. How have you seen that change over this 20-some years that you've been in the business?
Yeah, I mean, it's massive. I mean, I think you look at, I've been lucky over the last few weeks to go to the Champions League semi-final between Barcelona and Chelsea at Stamford Bridge, where there was 38,000 fans there, and I was also in Bilbao for the Champions League final for Olympique Lyonnais. Barcelona obviously won, 60,000 crowd, and like the Chelsea game was a pinch me moment because one, like I guess because you've always worked in the game in a work capacity, I've never really been to many games of that size as a supporter. And so that was a pinch me moment of, oh my goodness, I remember 25 years ago where people literally, I was saying earlier, like alongside me working in the men's game would refer to the team I was working with as the pub team, like the Sunday League pub team, and you know, derogatory comments, and you have to you either join in and repel it and it gets like escalated to be worse, or you just accept it and say, okay, like, you know, one day it's not going to be like that. And so I think to go from that, where games are not advertised and not knowing there's hardly anybody at games, to suddenly, you know, 37,000 at the Chelsea was a real pinch me. I think in terms of females, yes, it's increasing, and you know, I think this year in the Olympics, the International Olympic Committee have really made an effort that it's going to be 50-50 males, females athletes. However, you look at practitioners or coaches, and I think in the NCAA alone, like 10 or 13% of head coaches are female. So, you know, there's still that massive disparity. You know, also over the last 2 years across the various clubs, I've probably done close to 200 or 300 interviews for strength and conditioning coaches or nutritionists or psychologists or athletic trainers, and probably 5 or 10% have any experience or knowledge of the female athlete or the female physiology. And so one, there's their gender, but two, it's like that understanding of the female and the female physiology is just so lacking, and we need to do better. We need to educate. It comes back to that education. And, you know, 2019, the male staff walked out the door, and, you know, for me, everybody needs to be educated about female physiology because it's half of the population.
Mm-hmm. So how did it feel to having been in, very much in women's football, excuse me, not soccer, I've been corrected, all those years, then switching to a men's team, and talk a little bit about not just like different culture of just men's, you know, sports, but coming in as a woman in charge of a team too.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience. I mean, David Beckham was my boss, so that definitely helped. I think the other thing, so Phil Neville, who had been the England manager, was the manager at Inter Miami, and he kind of pursued me about going in for that role. So I guess straight away I had an advocate, I had an ally, I had somebody who I'd worked with, and, you know, we had a process of working together. So he, you know, massive respect in terms of kind of me coming in, so that definitely helped. But all of the coaching staff are male, you know, the department, and this was the first time where I had really overseen a department, because up to that point I'd probably worked as one or two, and, you know, you're managing one people and yourself. Whereas there I was suddenly that performance director across a department, and all of the staff were male, and it was me. And, you know, it was, you could see some of the staff, like, my gender did not matter, but some it did, and the way they interacted or spoke to me, or, you know, things like that from the staffing perspective. And, you know, there was some bumps and there was some confrontations in meetings all together, and, you know, that was hard. I think also, like, preface that a couple of years earlier, I'd also done a master's in sports directorship, and as part of that course, we did some work around leadership and like personality kind of trait profiling. And so at that time, I started to learn a lot about myself of like, okay, in this situation, this is how I prefer to operate or work. And so, you know, you kind of get insights of, okay, to get the best out of Dawn, this is how to do it. But also, sometimes people can perceive this as me doing this. So I guess through that process, I'd started to like reflect more, learn about myself. I'm very much kind of logically contained are my kind of profile and traits. So I almost had to think, okay, how do I maybe need to change some of that in different situations, but then also how do I react if, you know, somebody speaks to me badly? Because you can go two ways. You either, again, you know, the Sunday pub team, you either react badly back to the person, now you've just lowered yourself to them, or you stay true to your own values and kind of work through a process. And, you know, the two staff where there was issues by the end of the year, they'd left because we kind of weeded them out because they were not on the same train as where we were going. And, you know, some of the other staff who are still there, I still get messages from them and, you know, comments around, we miss you being here and, you know, things like that. So for me, I think it's, again, you stay true to your values in terms of the players. Like, the players were kind of unbelievable. It was great working with them. We had one player, Gonzalo Higuain, who very first time I kind of met him, obviously a global superstar, he just said, I only run with the ball. And so that was kind of my warning of anything kind of fitness related, but we just individualized the training for him. And the other boys would be doing, you know, like 30, 40 meter max sprints, and he would do something a bit shorter. I mean, again, he was also towards the end of his career, but a bit shorter and with a ball, and he'd have a big grin on his face, and you know, we kind of made it work. So yeah, and again, even the first day, I kind of remember this where Phil introduced me to the captain of the team, a Brazilian player, Gregor, and again, like the language sometimes was hard because there was a lot of Spanish speaking kind of players in there, and so Phil kind of calls Gregor over and he's like, Gregor, kind of meet Dawn, like heifer. And so I'm like, hello. And again, you know, heifer can have two meanings. In Spanish, it's boss. In English, it can be a little bit derogatory. And so every day for 365 days I was there, I would walk in and Gregor would walk in, heifer, right across the room. But it was like kind of like an affectionate thing as well. And I think probably part of the biggest like adjustment was like being aware of going in the locker room and sometimes not feeling part of that piece because you're very aware of the gender kind of piece. But other than that, I was treated very well and it was a good experience. But again, I was saying before about, I was also doing some work with FIFA in the women's game, and I felt the more I was in the men's game, I was like moving away from kind of still keeping a handle and being applied and being in there. And I just wanted to be in the women's game. So the Krikorian call and Michelle and her vision and her playing, you know, kind of was like, okay, this is where I want to be. And it's been amazing, and she's amazing. I mean, she moves a million miles an hour, and yeah, she's not done yet, and there's going to be so much more coming out. You know, bringing Arsenal and Chelsea women's across here, like, I just, yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I want to ask you a question about Michelle in a minute, but first I want you to start thinking about your questions because I do want to get us into a conversation here in a minute. So can you talk a little bit about her role as a woman owner in this business, and you know, are you seeing changes in that sort of aspect, the business aspect as well?
Oh yeah, 100%. I just think she's making people stand up and notice. She is raising the bar of how we support female athletes, because I've even seen in the 2 years I've come back into the NWSL where after 6 months, 8 months, because people see the number of staff we've got at Washington Spirit in the performance medical department, staffing sizes have increased. Like probably when I started back, 2 clubs had a performance director. Now every single team in the league has got a performance director. And then on the business side, you know, Nicole Hawkins is here, who's kind of director of comms at Washington Spirit. And the business side has kind of grown from 7, 8 staff, you know, 2 years ago to 30 plus staff. So again, it's like every side of it. And those of you who are regular people at the regular support, at the Washington Spirit games, just the growth in the crowd at Audi and the consistency. Like last year, probably like 8,000-9,000 was our standard consistent. Now it's 12, 13, and really exciting that this weekend we could be up to 19, 20, which is super exciting. So, but like even I go in the game, and like this has been the massive transition in the last 2 or 3 years, where up to that point, you know, I'm on the bench or I'm in the locker room, but now I'm like, no, like move back and let others come in and experience that and do that and mentor them from afar. So I just come in kind of as a fan. So I kind of roll in and go through the staff entrance, and then you can go down the stairs into the locker room and kind of be in and be seen and that kind of thing. And I go up the stairs and through the back kitchen and kind of pop out where like all the concession stands are, and I just walk around and you see the line for the merchandise, and it's just crazy. And you see the entertainment, and you see the bit for like entertainment for the kids, and it's just unbelievable what the whole business side have done to kind of grow that. And that side, like, I don't know, the people up there in that refreshments bit are making the most of eat all that you can. We get to see them, and yeah, they definitely make the most of that. So but it's just an unbelievable experience. And I think the bigger the crowds, like the bigger the crowds, the atmosphere is great. And then, you know, like Trinity, when she jumped into the crowd, rightly or wrongly, you know, should she have got a yellow card? Like, she's wild, the fact she'd thought about it beforehand, but that's Trinity. But, you know, I don't think Ule knew what she was doing, but, you know, she jumps in and she's like celebrating like a fan because it's such a great goal. And the team is so fun to watch. Like, I'm not going to lie, like when we had so many rookies, like first year pros come in, you're like, geez, are we going to be good enough and experienced enough? But seeing the likes of Croy Bethune, and who actually I'd worked with when she was 13 or 14 with the US teams, and then Hal Hirschfeld come through, and, you know, then just some of the other seniors like step up and being around, like Brittany Ratcliffe, who's come in, who's not playing as much, but is much like is a real senior player and a great person. Like, that's the piece of like, you can be the best practitioner or soccer player, but are you the right person and personality, and do you fit into the group? And the group, you see some of the pictures when they're on the road, and I'm a bit envious because you see these wonderful like team shots of them having so much fun, and it's great. They're like a family kind of, you know, working together.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about teamwork and that aspect of your career. Like, what does teamwork mean to you? What does that look like? What do you enjoy about it? What's challenging?
Yeah, I mean, I think having worked with the US team for 10 years, where it was kind of at a time when the US, like, you know, ran the show and could pull players out of clubs whenever they wanted, and we'd have almost like 150, 200 days together every single year. So you became a family, and, you know, you just see the TNT 7v7 game tournament that is just run, and Heather O'Reilly getting together, Ali Krieger, and some of the, you know, Casey Lloyd-Nogueira from previous, you know, it's just such like, that was probably my first real experience of real teamwork and people having your back, and like a family kind of environment group as much as the team. You know, just that group of US national team players. Like, my first camp was, I think, Megan Rapinoe's like 4th or 5th, and, you know, just seeing like her and Tobin Heath like grow up on the national team, seeing Rose Lavelle, Lindsay Horan come in at the start of their careers and their growth, and you just see that team around there. And then, you know, I think the other piece around building a team, probably my first experience was the Inter Miami, and, you know, some of that was trying to, I worked a lot with like my own kind of executive business coach, so one-on-one sessions, because I just like, I'd gone from being a practitioner of like managing 1 or 2 to suddenly managing 10, and I was like, I don't have the like qualifications or experience really to do it. I've never been shown or taught how to lead and manage, and how to react in this situation, how to deal with it. So I worked a lot with a coach to kind of work through a process, to reflect a lot, to figure out, okay, if that person's doing that, how do I react? What do I do? How do I kind of get the team working together? And then when I came in at Washington Spirit last year, like same, like we did a lot in that first year with our kind of group of 17 of, okay, what is important to each one of the 17? So it's not just about me. Oops. It's not just about me. Like, what is your why? Why are you here? What's yours? What's yours? And we did a lot like on the board, and it was everybody being involved. Like, and I almost like took a back seat because I wanted others to step up and do that. And then after we did that, we had some words that we aligned to, and we were like, okay, these are the most common. These are the most important. Okay, these are words, these are values, but what are the behaviors? For me, the words and the values are easy. Like, what are the behaviors? Because they're the most important things of, like, your behavior is, you know, kind of what you do every single day. And, you know, accountability is also a behavior. And, you know, if somebody's not living the values, like, hold them accountable, and you be accountable is important. So we did a lot of that first year at Washington Spirit. At the end, we had 2 staff leave, and again, part of that, you know, they were pulling a little bit of a different direction, and we've brought 2 other staff in, and I'd say the group now is very much like this. And then actually at the start of this year, we actually did profiling for everybody. It's called Spotlight Profiling, and it's very much kind of sport applied of kind of how you choose to react or be in certain situations, and like what are your flex points, and if you're under stress, how do you react? And, you know, it also gives like wiggle room kind of advice or guidance of, okay, how to get the best out of Monica, or how to get the best out of Dawn. This is, you know, if Dawn suddenly starts reacting like this, potentially she's stressed. So for me, it starts getting you to think about your own, how you are, but then how the other person is. So, you know, I'm very much like logic and contained, and actually there's somebody else in the department who's got exactly the same trait, and I see it in him, and I see me in him. And then there's somebody else who is not, like, who is empathetic, so very much about the feelings, and so they get more emotional, and I'm like, okay. So again, it's how do you kind of then work together to be effective? Because actually having those different traits is good, because then each of us can relate to players or to other staff in different ways, but it's how can you effectively work together? Because yeah, I have had clashes with people and like figured out, well, why are they doing that? Just why are they doing that? And then, you know, you work through some of that work, and then, you know, start getting an appreciation. I think it's about understanding yourself, and then understanding how other people might perceive you, even though you think you might be saying it this way, actually how you're saying it is being perceived like this. And then, you know, starting to work together. So we all did the profile. We then did 2 workshops kind of together where we kind of worked through different scenarios. And then, like, for me, you just continually work at it, because I think it's easy to say, it's too easy to say, I'm logical, that's why I replied like that. It's not about that. It's like, how can you, like, almost like, what's the word, like deviate to actually, you know, almost compromise to work as a team, because we're 17 individuals in the department, and we're, you know, we got some forceful, some who are more contained, and again, it's how do we kind of work together in that situation.
You should do some training for Congress. On that note, get off politics. Questions. Let's go ahead and get to some questions, because I know we have a lot of them. We will have a mic coming up, so if you'll raise your hand for a minute, I think a mic is coming around. Eric's going to bring a mic on this side. Maybe we can start up front here, and then we can move around. Thank you, Eric.
2 different questions.
Yeah.
All right.
Hi. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. First of all, this is incredible. Thank you so much. And you mentioned that, you know, the first women's sports bra was created in the late 1970s, and you've obviously taken a lot of time to build out an understanding of female physiology and providing agency to players with the data and understanding that. What piece of athletic equipment is the next takedown to then, like, support the work that you have been doing?
Oh, wow.
That's a
Let's
good
start
question.
with a nice, easy question.
So sorry.
Well, what I would say is, and Nicole, you should know this stat, only 6% of current research in sports science is on female athletes. So actually there's a lot of research out there that we can do, because most of our guidance of training, recovery, and nutrition is based on research on the white 70-kilogram male. So there's a lot. I mean, I think for me, it's probably something that is some kind of wearable where you can also get hormone kind of monitoring, because then that's the most direct way to monitor where kind of female is in the menstrual cycle. So potentially something like that, which probably some of these wearables, we're kind of going that way with the temperature, or validating the use of kind of a wearable like this with maybe a kind of more direct measure of hormones through urine samples or blood samples. So some kind of validation of that, so that we do know where a female is in their menstrual cycle, so that we can then individualize training or recovery or sleep for that individual female.
Great.
Thank you.
No worries, you're welcome.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah,
So I have a two-pronged question. The first half of it is essentially, with more and more funding coming in, and eventually, fingers crossed, say funding is sort of equal across all of the clubs, at least in the NWSL, what is differentiating folks if you have the top minds and the top equipment and the top facilities? So A, what is differentiating ability team to team? And then B, I'm curious for you personally, what's your philosophy on how do you balance intensity and growth with recovery?
We have a very easy crowd.
people
Yeah,
in the front
they're very
rows.
easy crowd.
Only
Okay.
softballs over here.
It's an interesting one. I think in terms of so almost like if every team or club has the same number of staff, how can you be better than, so how can we keep being better than, Gotham and all those teams? I think it's how you use the data and individualize it for the player. I think all the time, regardless even of gender, it's like the individualization piece all of the time. So even through some of this aura data, one of our PhD students is focused on looking at this in relation to travel. They like that one. So for some players, we can see straight away that when they travel back from the West Coast, it takes them an extra day to recover. So actually we modify on the first entry day for some of those players based on that. So I think it's how you use the data. When I was at US Soccer, like the players, Emily Sonnet probably being the main one, they'd always talk about Dawn's data, what is she doing with it? It's what you do with that data, like how you make interpretations and apply it to the individual in terms of that recovery or sleep, etc. So for me, that's how you keep or get that competitive advantage. The second part, sorry.
Balancing intensity and recovery.
Yeah, again, so we have certain training language which we develop with the head coach. I mean, it's also been a transition from an English-British coach last year to Spanish coaches this year. They very much have different styles. Last year, probably intensity of training was a lot lower. This year, I mean, it's kind of the Spanish Barcelona style of intensity, a lot of small side, a lot of accelerations, decelerations, which our players were not used to. So it was easing that in to build it up to a level threshold of what the Spanish coaches, like Adri is unbelievable, like what a great human being, but he's an unbelievable coach and great manner and great coaching style with the players. He's unbelievable. So I think it's then balancing his strategy, style, philosophy with where the players are at. Also adding in, you've got a young player in Chloe Ricketts, you've got first-year pros coming from college. So even though, Trinity Rodman is the same age maybe as Croy Bethune, Trinity's got 3-4 more years as a pro, whereas those guys have come from college. So all the time it's that individual lens, individual needs. Croy Bethune's had 3 ACLs in the past, so it's taken that into account. So I think it's knowing the individual, individualizing for the player, so then looking at across a week, so what's the travel been? So for example, this week the team played in Utah on Saturday, travelled back Sunday. The national team players had flown from wherever their last game was, I can't remember where it was, on the Wednesday into Utah, into Salt Lake City. So they had no time off until pre-national team camp. So the team flew back Sunday, everybody had Monday off, and then the national team players had Tuesday off as well. So again, it's then looking at that individual, and then even when they came back in Wednesday from this aura data, so as a department of 17, we meet every morning at say 8 a.m. By that time, players have had to complete a self-report wellness. We see their aura data, And so now we start seeing, okay, this is like the objective data of, you know, you can't fib about this. Sometimes players, they'll just say, yes, 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 I'm good on this, because they just want to train, whereas this they can't. So again, even that, you then look at the first day back in and we modify for some players because we see they're not quite recovered. So again, it's all the time putting all of that together. And then the other element layer that we collect is menstrual cycle data. So again, if a player's in phase 4, which is the 4 to 5 day window before the next bleed phase, tends to be when they have the most symptoms. So again, is player flagging anything? Do we need to modify anything? What nutritionally do we need to give them? Is there emotional changes? Does psychologists need to meet with them? So every morning we meet as a group of 17 for 30 minutes. What's the data showing? A smaller group then go to the technical team, finalise training based on what we've seen here and what we recommend. We then train, we then do it the other way. So then we do the report from training, meet as a group of 17. How was training? Did it meet? Did it not? Was there any injuries? Was there any issues? Do we need to modify anything for tomorrow? Then that smaller group go meet with the coaches, and then we do it all again tomorrow.
Wow.
So it's
lot.
that conversation about the play. Well, we probably speak about the players like 4 or 5 times every single day.
Wow. All right, a question on this side of the room and not.
She did have one though.
No, just kidding. Yeah. See the hand in the back.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. Also, thank you for bringing your expertise to the Spirit. As a fan who's seen the Spirit go from the Plex to Audi every game, it's incredible to see this level of investment, and also just to hear from someone who's like behind the scenes in it every day how great Michelle's vision is and how much she's really walking the talk. It's a lot easier to be a fan of a team when you can trust the front office. But I'm wondering, kind of going outside of the NWSL, although this obviously impacts it, I'm curious to hear your take on the whole ACL issue and if you will be involved at all with the FIFA working group to look into that. I know that announcement came out a while back, but yeah, just curious like how that's going to be structured or if you'll be involved.
Yeah, I think there's a few things on the ACLs. Like, I would love to know the answer of the why. You know, as fans of the Spirit know, in the last 2 years, we obviously had Anna Helferty last year and Savannah Kuhlman last year, and then obviously Anna, the re-injury this year, which absolutely heartbreaking good. And, you know, for all 3, we've looked at every single data point and we probably wouldn't change anything for either of them going into any. Like, Anna was probably the strongest in our group this year. She was so strong and so much more athletic and developed than, you know, last year. Last year was second day of pre-season when there was a whole new staff. So, you know, you kick yourself every single day about that because we didn't fully know her. But this year it's like, she was in the facility today, great spirits. Like, she did so much like pre-work before she went into surgery to get the swelling down and was in with a smile on her face. Unbelievable kind of person. So anyway, sorry, sidetracked. In terms of ACLs, like, there's obviously different reasons. There's sex differences, anatomy, you know, hormones, physiology, you know, kind of muscle size, muscle structure. I think the stat that came out was 84% in soccer happened during the deceleration to kind of press phase. That's when Savannah kind of did hers in training. So that then lends, okay, deceleration mechanics. Do we look at that? Actually, last year we brought in somebody like specialist in that area, 3-day workshop, flew them in from England to just educate our staff to do that. Now, even actually training the players in that movement is a risk because that's the movement that typically ACLs happen. So that's an awareness piece of that as well. So that is one, the sex differences and the anatomy, wider hips. The female foot is different, like the front foot is wider, the back heel is narrower. So even mechanics there, like if you're teaching somebody deceleration, which is based on the 70-kilogram white male, is it the same for females because of the foot shape is so different and anatomy is different, etc. So sex differences is one, gender differences of, you know, in sport, in girls, is there as much funding, is there as much specialist coaching, is there as much athletic development? So I think that's another one, or girls in environments where they can get that kind of concentrated support and athletic development. I don't think they are, and also the stat of girls dropping out of sport much higher rate instance than boys. Part of the reasons for that are they're trained like boys, and they don't have any female physiology educational training. So again, training methods as boys, and then education is lacking at the younger ages, and that's why a lot of girls drop out of sport. And then the third element is technology, so footwear, so boots. So again, you know, some of the Michelle invests in a company, Ida Sports, which is the actually only footwear company for soccer shoes that is based on the female foot. Like, they've done research on the female foot, etc. And you know, part of their research has been looking at some of those ACLs, especially in England, and you know, they suggest that at times maybe the players have not had the right footwear on for the right surface, and that players should think about the grass, how soft or hard it is, and actually what footwear they should be wearing, as well as actually the configuration of the boot or the cleat in terms of like the studs, etc. And then, you know, the other bits of technology like bra fit and bra size, you know, even anxiety around being on your period or wearing white shorts, or, you know, we do typically see, like, in the 4 to 5 days before the onset of a period, like mood state changes, emotional changes. So again, if females have got some anxiety around that, like, are they getting support? Because again, when I go back to the FIFA and the FIFA Pro work, where actually psychology and nutrition are the two areas where females, I think there's like something like 20 or 25% of females had access to that in their clubs or national teams. So I just think there's so many reasons, and I think until we do a big enough research study where we have all of the data points, where it's, you know, menstrual cycle, injury, illness, activity load, the objectives of the heart rate, the sleep, etc., we probably won't ever fully know. Like, we need to have all of that, but on a big data set. Like, even, you know, like Spirit, we can't get any insights because, again, touch wood, we had 3 in 2 years, and that's not enough numbers to actually really infer the why. You probably would need to collect for one team over 20 years to get the insights. So one is, like, we need to do the research to fully understand, and I know that's like, yeah, everybody's saying that, so that's one. Am I involved in the study? Kind of not directly, but FIFA Pro have set up like a women's innovation kind of working group, and I am part of that, and the first meeting for that is in a month. So yes and no, like the project is being run through Leeds Beckett University in the UK, but they're going to have a kind of a working group, women's interest working group, and I've also, just through being kind of involved a bit with Lyon and London City, being involved with the European Clubs Association, where Michelle is the only female on the board of kind of directors, and I've kind of been involved a bit in the high performance groups over there. Yeah, to just kind of find out a little bit more, you know, just some of what they're doing as well.
All right, let's take one more question, and then we have to wrap up, I'm afraid. So make it a good one if we have one. Well, actually, I don't see anyone. Oh, in the back. We got one in the back. Make sure that side. Yes, there we go. Thank you, Emma, for pointing her.
Yeah, my question is actually about, so you talked a lot about women and menstrual cycle and periods, working with players who are pregnant, and how you have supported women from like the time they're getting pregnant and going through that into like after, and also how you've seen that support change, because I feel like that's something we really haven't heard a lot about, is how female athletes deal with, or not deal with, but are supported through pregnancy as professional athletes.
Yeah, sure. No, it's a great question. Yeah, I've worked, it's interesting because in my years with England, Katie Chapman was a player with England, and she had 3 boys, and so I worked with her both in the build up to her having the babies and then also kind of post. But I'd say it would be without direction or real full understanding of, I feel like, what we know now. Like, a lot now is education around pelvic health and pelvic floor, and, you know, just making sure kind of that is strengthened before you kind of develop too much. And then Christy Rampone was probably the first player when I came in to work with the US. Where she had her second child, Reese, and she was back so quick. She is like, superhuman, like probably the fittest player I've ever worked with. I mean, she won the World Cup at 40 years of age, so that's pretty impressive. And I see pictures of her on social media now where she probably looks fitter than when she played. But and some of that was just like applying like training, like strength training kind of knowledge. And then probably the first one where I worked a bit more closely with kind of their physician was Amy Rodriguez. When she came back, and I lived in LA and she was from Orange County, and she would drive up to do training sessions as she was kind of coming back. And then obviously Alex Morgan had a baby and publicly spoke about there's no guidance, I'm doing my own research. And I think since then you now see the increase of support around kind of players. Like there was a Chelsea player, her name is totally Leopolds, Melanie Leopolds, the German player, where she spoke about the support of Georgie Broomvels, who's female health expert, and then Emma, I forget her name, Brockwell, who is a pelvic health specialist. And she spoke about that support both in the lead up to having the baby and then post-baby. So, and then if you've just seen most recently, FIFA have just released some guidance about maternity kind of rules around players and coaches who have babies, and soon to come over the next few months. I know there's a group working on return to play guidelines for mothers like postpartum. So again, it's been lacking for so long, and I think females who've returned to play at that high level without that specialized support are just super and incredible. But that change is coming, and I'm confident in the next 3 months FIFA will produce that piece of work around return to play guidelines, which is so long overdue for players who postpartum who've given birth.
That's great. All right, well, I'm going to finish with one question for you, and then I'm going to wrap up. So what advice would you give to a young woman who's interested in going into sports science or in this sort of area? Like, what would you say to them now that they should think about, or you'd encourage them to follow?
I think one, make sure you have an understanding of female health, female physiology. You can upskill, like even at FIFA, I've been involved in a project where there's like FIFA Health, I'm totally blanking on what the name of it is, but FIFA Health kind of understanding background that is globally accessible. Like that is where we want to get to, is to give that education globally accessible. So one is to make sure you understand the female body and the female physiology. And then it's like, what else is out there where you can gain more understanding, more experience, go and shadow practitioners, speak to people. I don't know, I feel like now I don't always go to conferences. I more try and reach out to people and have conversations and, try and get more out of them that way, or, just reach out to people working in female sport and observe like different females and how they move, how they operate, or observe practitioners who work with female athletes across all of the disciplines. And I just think that's the best way, is upskill yourself and then go and observe and even volunteer and do some work if you haven't got that experience and it is an area or a field you want to aspire to be in, because that information is starting to be out there and is more accessible. And I think it's also on you to go out and make an effort to kind of get access to that and upskill yourself.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. I think we can all say that we could probably spend all night chatting with her. I've so many more questions I'd love to ask. I'm sure you do too, but let's give Dawn a real warm round of applause. Thank you so much. And since I have a captive audience, first of all, I hope if you haven't already and may not have a chance tonight, because security is probably going to chase you out before you can, but if you haven't been yet, I do hope you'll come back and see our Change Your Game Cambia tu Juego exhibition, where you get to learn many more wonderful stories about lots of different people, very diverse in lots of different fields, but also the jog bra inventors, who are wonderful. And there's some video of them too. But also, speaking of teamwork, you know, as I said at the beginning, I'm just recently left here, but I have a fabulous bunch of friends and former colleagues who are in the room who've worked really hard on these programs, on the exhibition, on everything Lemelson Center does. And so I'm going to try to thank each of them alphabetically by first name, if I can do it. So this will be the test. Allison Oswald, who is here, was at the archives table. We have Emma Gran, who's in the back, who is the program manager for this. Eric Hintz, holding the microphone here, is our deputy director and worked as one of the curators on the exhibition as well. Okay, I'm going to do this. Kathy Franz, who is our current director. Kristen Sheldon, who works in our Spark Lab managing that group. Laura Havel, who's our communications manager, who's in the back. Meg Marr, who was one of the curators on the exhibition as well. And we're sad to say she's leaving soon, so wanted to make sure to thank her. Nissa Buning, who's here, I know, who works in our Spark Lab and our Spark Lab National Network. And last but not least, Tim Pula, who's the inventor and innovator here at Lemelson Center. So I just want to thank all of them for their hard work on this program. And I did want to point out for you, first of all, I hope you'll sign up for future Lemelson Center programs, but also there is a history film forum that some of you might be interested in that's coming up here at the National Museum of American History next week. It is the DC premiere and possibly the national premiere of COPA 71, told by the pioneering women who participated in it and built from archives unseen for 50 years. This is the extraordinary story of the 1971 Women's Soccer World Cup, a tournament witnessed by record crowds that has been written out of sporting history until now. Then this special screening will be followed by a talk back with co-directors and writers Rachel Ramsey and James Erskine. So I hope you will come back for that. That is on June 18th.
It's so good, I saw it. Everyone should see it.
All right, woo! We have our own fan here. So with that, I just really want to thank all of you for coming out tonight, taking the time to sit here, and I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. And let's have one more round of applause for Don.